Well, welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of EntrepreneurFEST 2021. It's very generous of you to help emerging entrepreneurs around the country. And certainly there has been the impact of COVID for entrepreneurs starting a business.
Yep.
Really appreciate your time. And could I start by asking you, Michael, for the benefit of the audience, what is a futurist?
Well, firstly, good to be able to spend some time with you, and great to be able to have this as something as that hopefully is a resource at what is a really tricky time for anyone, but particularly for entrepreneurs, where business is, still in that sometimes that embryonic stage, and you can feel a bit vulnerable. These sort of disruptive times can be really confronting. So I think this is such an important time to have these really honest discussions and talk about strategy. So pleasure, glad to be a part of the event. And what a futurist is, and it's a bit of a strange profession or a strange label. It's one that I sort of don't often apply to myself too readily. I often get it applied to me by the media because it's just easy to box someone as a futurist. But at its core, what a futurist is someone who tries to identify patterns before they become trends and trends before they become disruptions. And that's really where I spend my time, trying to keep a sense of what's happening out there in the marketplace, particularly in the area of technology, and then helping industries and clients get ready for what's going to hit before it becomes too late.
Oh, that's amazing. I've had the pleasure of seeing you speak and present on a couple of occasions, and I've read your latest book, which is fabulous. And I knew that it would be wonderful for entrepreneurs across the country to have a glimpse into your insights. And can I ask you, Michael, from an entrepreneur's perspective, could you add advice around understanding their customer? Not only are you looking into the future, but do you have advice for entrepreneurs around the importance of understanding their customer?
Well, I think for all of us, that's where we've got to start, is the customer's needs, where the customer is at, the customer's level of understanding. And I think the reality is for most entrepreneurs, we get into a certain area in terms of either the industry or the business we're in because we're passionate about it. We love it, we live it, we breathe it, we read about it. The challenge is our customers don't. And I think sometimes the biggest thing we need to do is step back from our businesses and look at it from the perspective of a customer. What are we doing that perhaps doesn't make sense to our customers? Because we can often make intellectual leaps. We can assume our customers understand the industry, understand the terms or the jargon that for us is just part of daily life because we live and breathe our businesses, but for them, often isn't part of their daily life. So I think that's the most important thing, is get alongside your customer, step in their shoes. And the practical way you can do that, by the way, get someone who you know, like, and trust, maybe a family member who's just a step removed. Maybe it's a cousin or a nephew or a niece. Get them to engage with you as a customer. Get them to come into your store, get them to come onto your website and be brutally honest. What are we doing that doesn't make sense to you? Because they'll be honest, but they're distant enough from you that they'll often see things or pick things up that it's easy to miss.
Yes. And business advisors, of course, will tell entrepreneurs and advise entrepreneurs, you need to have a business plan, you need to have a clear vision.
Yep.
Can you share from a futurist perspective, how far ahead should an entrepreneur be looking with their business plan?
Oh, great question. So I think in terms of this notion of purpose, I'm talking like 5 to 10 years out. So I'm always looking at from my own perspective as a small business owner, like where's the tone of society heading? Like where are the tides heading? How do I gear up for where society is going to be in 3 to 5 and even 10 years time? But that's in terms of purpose and overall vision and mission. Strategy, much, much shorter. I'm not really looking too far beyond 18 months at the moment. I'm actually finding right now personally, and as I'm working with clients, I'm seeing the same thing. And this is not just small businesses, but some of the large corporates as well. The easiest place strategy-wise right now is the midterm. So you can sort of plan 18 months out. The hardest point right now is the really short term. Trying to plan out the next quarter or the next 2 quarters is so difficult right now just because there's so much uncertainty. So if you are feeling that way, don't feel overwhelmed by that. Most of us we don't know what's going to happen next week. I mean, every day, most of us rise and fall by the 11 o'clock updates from the Premier, and you never know what's coming. So in the short term, don't stress out if you can't lock that in too much, and don't force yourself to lock that in too much. But the medium term, that's where we need to be playing, because we will come out of this at some point. There will be a boom post this COVID whole disaster. And once that boom hits, we want to be ready for it. So that's where we've got to be spending our time focusing.
Fantastic. And from your wealth of experience, what are some of the common mistakes that you see business owners make? And what advice or tips could you give in that regard?
I think going back to what we talked about before is probably the most common one, this notion of getting just too close to your business, not seeing things from the perspective of your customer. I mean, a good example of this is I was doing some work with the franchisee network at Clark Rubber. And Clark Rubber, most of us know as a business, most of them running their franchisees, the franchisees themselves are running small businesses, and they know and love their stores. And the interesting thing is they did some research a few years ago and found that a whole lot of customers actually avoid going to a Clark Rubber store because the smell is so overwhelming. I mean, you walk into a Clark Rubber store and the smell of the rubber and all the associated products. And funnily enough, the franchisees went, what smell? You know, like they didn't notice it was there. So I think that's probably the first thing, is you just get too close to it. And the second thing is we tend to focus, particularly in small to medium-sized businesses, on, you know, the features of what we do, the features of our products, how we compare with other products in the marketplace, rather than focusing enough on the benefits. And again, this goes to the point of always stepping in your customer's shoes and looking at everything you do from their perspective. They're interested far more in benefits than they are in features. And yet most business owners, particularly entrepreneurs, tend to focus on features when they try to sell their products and sell their services. And that stuff impresses us and maybe impresses others in our industry, but it doesn't necessarily resonate with the customer.
Wow. In terms of outlook, and I'm fascinated, you know, from the perspective of a futurist, can you share an anecdote or an example where there has been a fairly clear prediction about a trend in the future and people really found it difficult to understand or accept at the time, but then it did come to pass?
Well, I mean, the last few years, there have been quite a few of those. I mean, from a very, I guess, personal perspective, and we've all lived this one, we look at, for instance, the demise of Kodak. I mean, gosh, back in the late 70s, the Kodak executive team, if you go back and look at the notes of the board meeting notes and the executive team discussions, were all about the fact that new digital photography was going to change the game. I mean, they discovered digital photography back in the late 70s. But there was a sense in which, you know, people still love film. They'll always take photos on film. And I think for most of us, if you talked in the 90s and even the early 2000s, the idea that film would disappear entirely, that was inconceivable. And yet, of course, we look now, and most of us, even the idea of having a camera is inconceivable. I mean, most of us, the only way we take photos is on our phones. This is stuff that we were predicting this back in the 90s, early 2000s. There was discussion about this very thing, but most of us couldn't see it happening. Same with video stores. Yeah, but I think the most present one that we're all experiencing right now is remote work. I mean, the whole discussion around people working remotely and flexibly in their homes. I mean, Alvin Toffler was talking about this stuff. The great futurist Alvin Toffler in his book, Future Shock, talked about this 30 or 40 years ago. And yet most of us said, no, we still have to work together. We've still got to be in offices. And I think what we've learned in the last 18 months is there is still a place for the office. There's still a place for proximity, being in the same place as others, and the collaboration, the ideas, the sense of togetherness that comes from that. But we've discovered in the last 18 months that actually we can work remotely far better than any of us thought. And, you know, as I'm working with clients, one of the biggest learnings that a lot of my leadership clients have found is that they can trust their staff. And that's big, you know, because honestly, up until COVID, most leaders would say, I'd love for them to work remotely and work flexibly, but I just don't know if they'll get anything done. Then all of a sudden we were forced to, you know, into this global work from home experiment. And now we've realized that to a degree, it can actually work. So this is something that most people even 3 or 4 years ago would have said couldn't have happened, but it has.
And Michael, in terms of change, have you observed a technology innovation or a recent process change that you think has revolutionized the way that business is done?
Oh, there's been a number. I think the one that stands out to me that for most people dialing in today or watching today would resonate with is the whole world of payments and how payments have changed. I mean, I remember my first job, some of you remember this as well. Remember you used to like put the credit card on the slide machine, and then the triplicate thing that had the 3 colored paper, and you'd slide the credit card across, and you have to go and lodge that with the bank in the afternoon before the bank closed. I mean, in my time span professionally, I've seen it go from that to the point where for my own business, I don't even have a merchant facility with a bank anymore. Everything is done on Square. And the little Square devices, I mean, they've been revolutionary. They're so much more accessible and easy to use. But what's interesting is we've seen the whole financial services space get really muddy in the last little while. So you've got a company like Square that have come in and revolutionized the payment space. And now Square are offering small business finance. So you can actually go to Square if you've got a merchant facility with them and actually get a loan rather than going to your local bank. And because they've got full visibility on your business and transactions, they can approve that far more quickly and easily than a bank can, because they can see everything that goes through your terminal. And then we've seen in the last couple of weeks, even Jack Dorsey and the whole Square team that have looked to acquire Afterpay. So yeah, I think in the transaction of financial services space, that's been where I think we've seen some of the most significant change. And honestly, I don't think we've seen anything yet. I think that the buy now, pay later space is just heating up. We've seen Apple make moves in the last few weeks to do the same sort of thing. So I think this has been one area where we've seen light years of change happen in the space of about 18 months.
Absolutely. And I think it would be amazing for our audience today for me to be able to ask you, Michael, as a futurist, as an author, do you have a game-changing trend that you feel is going to have a big impact on business in the near future?
Yep, I do. In fact, there's a few we could look at, but I think the one that to me just keeps coming up time and time again is the influence of augmented reality tech. So what we're seeing right now is virtual reality is valuable, but it's still tricky, because virtual reality is where, you need to escape from real life into a virtual reality. So put on a set of goggles, for instance, a headset like the Oculus ones. And Facebook, of course, purchased Oculus, and that's still something they're working heavily on. But I think augmented reality is more interesting, because you can use augmented reality by literally holding your phone up and the world comes alive. We've seen some examples of that even in the last few weeks with a new update from the Google app, where you can use in Google Maps augmented reality to hold your phone up and your phone will guide you around, telling you what's in front of you, reviews for businesses, for instance, based on what you're seeing through your camera lens. So I think augmented reality is definitely the one to watch. If you look at Facebook right now, 20% of their headcount as a company is dedicated to developing virtual and augmented reality technology. That's huge. I mean, they've placed a big bet. And in fact, we'll probably see in the next few months, they're launching a collaboration with Luxottica, who own Ray-Ban. And they're actually going to develop a set of smart Ray-Bans, which they'll launch to the market in the next few months, which will probably be a bit of a game changer, because if you remember Google Glass, remember those things that you could wear that look like a little bit of cyborg type deal? They didn't work. They weren't cool. It was the wrong timing for the marketplace. Facebook teamed up with Ray-Ban is a different story. We're talking really clever technology that is sort of cool. And we could see this be a really significant, very fast moving, game changing tech in the next few months.
And in terms of entrepreneurs that are possibly dealing with the challenges, the impact of COVID at the moment, and they want to take their business idea forward, could you share some advice on, if they understand the value of having their future outlook and understanding their customers, as a futurist, how could an entrepreneur try and establish a competitive advantage for their business?
Well, the goal is you want to be ahead of the marketplace, ahead of your competitors, but not too far ahead. I mean, going to the example we just talked about there with Google Glass, they were too far ahead of the market. And so you don't want to be ahead of where your marketplace is up to in terms of technology adoption. You want to be just ahead of it. And I think the analogy that I think is useful, and I mean, I'm a Wollongong boy, that's where I grew up. And so, growing up, surfing was part of, the culture and our lifestyle. And of course, anyone who knows how to surf would know that one of the key skills in catching a wave is you've got to spot the wave while it's on the horizon, while it's building. And you've got to swim out, paddle out, get in position. And you've got to be in position just ahead of the wave, not too far ahead, but not too far out either. You've got to be in the right spot and be ready to catch the wave. And I think one of the things I see often for small business owners is they leave it too late to paddle out. They wait until it's, they want to make sure it's actually a thing before they really get ready for this trend. It's like, I'll just watch and see. By the time you watch and see and all your competitors paddle out, the wave is cresting and breaking and they're all riding it. And you're like, I better move. It's too late at that point. So you've got to be just ahead of the wave, but not move too quickly. So I think that's the key challenge. And there's no simple formula for this. It really does require a bit of like instinct or intuition to know the best way to go, the best time to move. The way I try and do this personally is I stay across a whole lot of stuff. So I read every day about 3 or 4 newspapers or magazines digitally to get a sense of what's coming next, to see what are some of the patterns that are beginning to form. So for some of those dialing in today, feel free to connect on LinkedIn, because I share every day about 8:30 in the morning. I send a trend update, which is a bit of like what I've seen overnight, what's starting to take shape. And the idea is you want to get enough of this stuff on your radar that when an opportunity pops up, you'll recognize it for what it is, because you've already got your eyes attuned to it. That's the key challenge right now.
That is fantastic. I love that advice to stay just ahead of the wave.
Yeah.
I saw you present recently and I was blown away. Just one of the components that you presented on, and the audience was captivated. You spoke about Gen Z as the new generation of consumers. And I would say in an audience that previously would have thought of themselves as well immersed in the marketplace. And, you know, some people made some lovely comments thanking you for your insights, and they owned creative agencies or digital marketing agencies. When you profiled Gen Z as the new generation of consumers, I think everyone in the audience was blown away and really did not know much at all. Could you just please share some of those highlights about Gen Z?
Well, I mean, Gen Z, so firstly, they're beginning to get all grown up. And so Generation Z, the birth years for them, so they're the group who come just after the millennials or Gen Y. So just to be clear, millennials and Gen Y, we hear those two terms, that's actually the same generation. It's just that while we and the UK and parts of Asia talked about them as Gen Y, the Americans called them millennials for reasons that are too complicated to explain here. But what we've done is we've actually merged those labels over the last few years, and we've all just gone, let's just call them millennials because that's just easier. The group after them is called Gen Z. So they're born in the late 90s through to the early 2010s. What that means is this group are sort of in the last few years, they're graduating from university and TAFE, they're entering adult life. And so what this means is they're getting to a point in their consumption cycle in terms of when they tend to be economically significant where you can't ignore them anymore. And so they possess a lot of money in terms of percentage of consumption power in the marketplace, but the differences are profound. So for them, just to pick a few of the differences, I mean, sustainability is a non-negotiable for them. It's just it's all they've grown up with. It's a part of their values set. And we saw in the last few weeks, Etsy, for instance, which is a site that many viewers would know well, purchased Depop for like $1.6 billion. I mean, a huge sum. And they bought it for cash. That gives you a sense of how significantly they saw this as an acquisition. So Depop is essentially a Gen Z focused website or an app for buying used clothing and used goods. The idea is a whole focus on sustainability. That's how significantly companies are taking this for Gen Z right now. So equity and sustainability are vitally important. For them, that sense of cohesion and collaboration being with others is critical. And what we're seeing right now, interestingly, is that Generation Z are struggling with remote work far more than older generations are. And this is a surprise to a lot of people because you would think that, hey, remote work, the digital environment would be very normal and comfortable for the digital natives, and it is, but this is a group who are actually craving connection, particularly that sense of belonging and community. So I think one of the things we're seeing with Gen Z is that even though they're very comfortable with the technology, they're also looking for some of the stuff that we're not doing right now because of lockdowns. And I think we need to not ignore that. And I think that's going to be a big trend over the next 3 to 5 years, is creating experiences and opportunities for Gen Zs to gather together, because that's going to be something they're going to be craving.
And I remember, again, just observing the audience's reaction.
Yeah.
And you shared the apps that Gen Z are engaging on.
Yeah.
And people were self-aware enough to acknowledge, you know, there's wonderful people from creative agencies and digital agencies. They said, wow, we possibly only were aware of maybe 2 of the apps that you profiled. I was only aware of 2 of the apps that you presented. And then you had a profound insight in terms of the paradigm shift, where a lot of business owners think about selling products and services. You spoke about the importance of the brand for Gen Z. And I think that was maybe the biggest note that I made on the day, this sort of paradigm shift from products and services to brand. And I imagine that's part of when you said sustainability is an important feature for them. Can you just share a small insight on that brand game changer paradigm shift?
I think, and this is something I actually learned when I was doing some work recently with Chobani, who many would know, like big yogurt brand. And I was chatting with the head of marketing there, and he was saying that that's the big realization they've made in the last little while, is that Gen Z buy brands, not products. And so values alignment is vitally important. And it's not just, I mean, sustainability is big, but for a brand that they identify with as cool and theirs, that they feel they can own. Now, this doesn't just mean, by the way, that older brands are not going to be relevant because older generations liked them first. I mean, in fact, this morning, one of the articles that I was reading this morning that I think I shared on LinkedIn, in fact, in the last few hours, was a case study of Vans. So Vans, the big skate shoe manufacturer, have just set up a virtual skate park hangout environment in Roblox. So Roblox is one of the gaming platforms that teenagers are pretty comfortable with and love right now. And so the way Vans as a brand are connecting with Gen Z is they're saying, you know what, hang out virtually in a space you're already in, which is where you're playing video games right now. But in that environment, it's going to be branded by and produced by us. So it's creating that affinity with them as a brand, so that when this generation want to go buy shoes, for instance, that brand is front and center. Now, this is not new. I mean, brands have been doing this for decades, if not longer, but it's the way we do it that's changing, and the platforms and the environment. So I think with Generation Z, we need to go where they are. And where they are is often in these digital spaces that, to be honest, for most of us, we're like, we just don't get it. Like, because we don't play games the way they do online, but we need to understand this generation because this is our future marketplace.
It totally resonates with me. My teenage children are obsessed about Vans as shoes, and I don't understand why. You know, I totally get it. You know, and I grew up and there were brands like Reebok and Nike, and they're obsessed about Vans, but I've never heard them explain why. And I'll definitely go and check out the virtual skate park now.
And to that point, you know, that they probably can't tell you why, and that's the key. Because that to them, it's not like there's a specific reason they can say, I like this brand because it's a vibe. It's like they get me and I get them. I mean, it's hard for them to pinpoint why they identify or have affinity with that brand. And that's the secret. That's the magic. If you can get them to identify with a brand, but not know exactly why, there's not a stat that they can quote about how much they donate to certain causes. It's not an intellectual thing. It's a gut thing. And I think, to your point, that's for younger generations and for all of us, that level of affinity, that's where the game is at.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Michael. You've certainly stimulated creative thinking for entrepreneurs around the country. They will definitely be asking us to share some resources and links, which we will do, so that they can link in with you and follow you. Could you just share in closing a little bit of an overview of your latest book? You know, I'd like to mention some things, but it wouldn't do it justice. I'd just love for you to share an overview of your latest book.
Yeah, cool. So the book came out in April, which seemed like it was the right timing, but now I look back and go, oh, actually, no one saw the Delta wave of COVID coming. So the book is called The New Now. And so the subtitle is essentially how to gear up for a post-COVID world. You know, where are the opportunities in a post-COVID world going to be? We thought the world was somewhat post-COVID, didn't we, back in April and May? And then we discovered it wasn't quite post-COVID yet. So the focus of the book, though, is looking at the technologies and the trends, be they generational trends, marketplace trends, technology trends, that have sped up throughout the pandemic, and they're looking at where's the world going to land at the end of this. And the reality is, even though the whole Delta, second or third wave, depending on where you live in the country, even though this is a really taxing and challenging time, the truth is a lot of what we saw accelerate last year, all it's just done is speed up again. And so the book is looking at what are those technologies that are speeding up and have sped up, and where are the opportunities now because of that, and how do you gear up for those opportunities? That's the real focus. So in the book, there are 10 different categories of change that we've seen really accelerate over the last little bit because of the pandemic.
Fantastic. And I'm sure a lot of people will be keen to read that. Thank you so much for your time, Michael McQueen, futurist and author, ladies and gentlemen. And in terms of you sharing some insights and motivation and stimulation to entrepreneurs around Australia who are dealing with the challenges of COVID at the moment, thank you so much for your insights in our book.
You're very welcome. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, Michael.